Hello, I'm Doug, and welcome to the Krewe of Japan Podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture.
This time on Krewe of Japan Podcast.
Hey podcast listeners, grab your passports. The Krewe is talking Japan travel. In a time when travel ban restrictions have severely limited the number of inbound non-Japanese travelers to Japan, it's good to know what's going on. In fact, at the time of recording this intro right now, news broke just hours ago that strides were being made to bring back visa waivers for triple-vax travelers or those willing to submit PCR testing pre-arrival, allow independent travel, and eliminate daily entry caps. While these changes aren't officially official just yet, this just goes to show you that these travel regulations are all in a constant state of evolution, changing weekly. In an interview recorded at the end of August, I sit down with friends of the podcast and special guest host Rob Dyer of The Real Japan and Allan Richarz of Tokyo Confidential Podcast to talk about their recent travels back to Japan this past summer. Despite things changing so much already in just the last few weeks, we touch on the types of visas that allow for travel right now.
For Canadian and American citizens, that they're doing the e-visa now. You can apply online and just upload all your forms. And it said 5 working days you can get an electronic visa.
All that pre-departure red tape we experience.
There's a document you download which is items required for temporary visitor visa application. And there are 12 points to it. There's multiple sub-points. And a part of all of this is making 2 trips to the visa, or for me, the Japanese embassy in London.
Noticeable changes from pre-pandemic times.
This time it was just empty, and a lot of the long-standing restaurants and bars that had been there, they were all closed. Some of them had been there 30 plus years, but end of April, start of May, which I guess is around the start of the new business year, a lot of them had closed.
And then even predictions on the future of travel to Japan.
It will bounce back, and I think it will bounce back pretty quickly as soon as the doors are fully open, whenever that might be.
This episode will share some stories that show even though we all traveled within a few months apart in summer of 2022, things were very different for each of us. Hopefully this conversation will help frame ways to navigate through the ever-changing regulations surrounding travel to Japan during these pandemic times, although maybe that's coming to an end soon. Now prep your MySOS app and grab your carry-on bag. It's time to board, and thank goodness we don't need those PCR tests anymore. Let's go. All right, so today we actually have 2 very special guests. One is a friend of the podcast, has been on our episodes before, Rob Dyer of The Real Japan. Hey, Rob, how you doing?
Hi, Doug. Yeah, it's great to be back. Looking forward to a catch-up chat.
Yeah, and for those who aren't aware or maybe didn't hear the episode or new listeners, Rob was on season 2 where we did an off the beaten path episode about traveling around Kansai. So if you haven't listened to it, go check it out. And our other guest is new to the podcast, but a guy I've known for, Allan, I don't even know how long. But Allan Richarz, how you doing, man?
Not bad. Thanks for having me.
Allan is the host of Tokyo Confidential Podcast. If you do want to say a little bit about yourself in terms of what you do and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. So I'm a lawyer in Toronto, Canada, but I also do newspaper writing on the side, mostly about Japan-related topics. And recently I started a podcast, Tokyo Confidential, which builds on a lot of the research that I do for the newspaper articles, tries to get into a bit more depth, because there's no word limit in a podcast. So I think we've known each other probably since 2008 when we were back on Jet.
Yep.
So
the old Jet days, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
So before we get started with our actually topic of the conversation today, which is going to be a roundtable about traveling to Japan during the pandemic, specifically, I guess, right now, because it's 2022, things are ever evolving. But before we get into that, we're going to get there, I promise. We usually do something where our guests talk about their experiences or what they think of when they hear the word New Orleans, since we're a New Orleans-based podcast. Rob, you've already done this. You shared a pretty funny story last time, but I think you mentioned you had another story that you remembered that you wanted to share. So I'm going to let you go first, and then Allan, then you can go next.
Sure. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, this story actually relates to my passion for music, which was one of the things I wanted to connect with when I was traveling in America. This goes back to 1997. So this is kind of pretty old school and really pretty much pre-internet. So I was a subscriber to a magazine called Industrial Nation, which was about the industrial music scene, electronic music scene globally. And there was like a city profile every issue. And there was a profile in one of the issues about New Orleans and this club that you could go to. So we were traveling to New Orleans, and I thought, great, I'll hook up with a person that wrote this article about the music scene that I know I'm going to like. So I've got a club I can go to when I'm in New Orleans. And the only thing about this was all done by writing old school handwritten letters via the post. Because
what's that?
Pre-email, yeah, remember those days. So I wrote to this person who I didn't really know, just read this article by them, and we corresponded and literally said, we're going to be in the city on this date. And she said, okay, I'll meet you in this cafe at this time on this day. So that was literally all we had planned. So I was there with two friends. This was around October time. And we met up, sat in a cafe. And of course, I don't know what this person looks like. So I'm just looking for a person that's kind of looking a bit alternative into the same kind of music I'm into. And sure enough, I met this woman and she said, yeah, okay, there's the club you need to go to is kind of just down the road here a bit. It's on the fringes. There's kind of like a warehouse area. I don't know if it's still there. And so she said,
do you remember the name of the club?
No. Oh, well, this is where it gets a bit interesting. So she described it. And so I took all these notes. Again, old school notes, no smartphones in those days. This was a notepad. And she said, yeah, just knock on the door, literally give them my name and this password. And I thought, oh, this is a bit unusual. You know, I was expecting, sounds a bit underground, even for my tastes. So it didn't open till late at night. So we went out, had a meal, had a drink, you know, getting in the party mood, ready to go clubbing. And followed these instructions. And we were getting to this kind of really quiet part of town. And there was this warehouse area. And I was thinking, this doesn't look that kind of safe or normal. You know, tourists don't seem to come here much. And then we found this address, and there was this big metal door with a little kind of hatch in the middle. And so we rung this bell or knocked on the door, I can't remember which. And literally a panel in the middle of the door opened up, you know, like in the movies. And somebody looked at me and just didn't say anything. And I said, oh, hi, we're friends of so-and-so's. We're here for the club. And they still didn't say anything. And I was like pausing to get, okay, this is a bit awkward. So I said, oh, the password. Yeah, the password is, and whatever the password was, the little hatch shut, closed again. And then we heard the bolts going, and this door, big iron door, opened up, and we were let inside. And I thought, wow, this is really strange. And we went inside, followed up some stairs, and waited in a waiting area to be let in. And we were sitting there, and this was at the time when Madonna was huge. And she just had her book out, this big book called Sex, which is, you know, kind of, you know, the alternative lifestyle that she used to lead and so on. And I thought, okay, yeah, this is a bit unusual. And then, long story short, once we were given the okay and, oh, you're friends of so-and-so, yeah, we're here from the UK, we're traveling. Okay, we'll let you in. You can get into the club. So we got into the club and all the music's playing and we're thinking, oh, okay, yeah, this is our sort of scene. And then, of course, what we realized and why there was so much, you know, covert operations and all the rest of it was this was actually, normally it was a sex club and they were just being a little bit precautions because basically this was just a one-off night where it was just a general club night and it was music and all that kind of stuff. So
wow.
It was a bit unexpected, but it was absolutely fine. And it was a great fun night out, but it was a kind of strange way to be introduced to New Orleans.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've never heard of this club. I don't know if it's still around, but
course.
You know, apparently if you need passwords and stuff, yeah. I guess I don't know the right people. Yeah. So Allan, and what we usually do is you don't necessarily have to have traveled to New Orleans or to have a New Orleans story, but when you hear New Orleans, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
So, to my great shame, I have not actually been able to visit New Orleans yet, but when I think of the city, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the Saints, football.
All right. There you go.
For some reason,
after my own heart.
For some reason on Canadian TV, a lot of the NFL games that get shown up here are Saints games, so it's so
there's
they're always on TV up here.
That French and New Orleans connection, right? I feel like there's part of that, and then goes back historically. They had a lot of the fur trappers and stuff that came down from Canada to New Orleans. All right, so that's awesome. Actually, there's a game tonight, and I'm going to be going, so I'm looking forward to that, even though it's preseason. So we're going to move on from our talk about New Orleans. Enough about New Orleans. We're going to talk about Japan, right? We want to talk about traveling over there. And as we all know, the doors have been slammed shut since COVID started, for better or for worse. And everyone has different various opinions on that. But I think it's slowly and slowly started to reopen over the last about a year, I would say. I want to say it started kind of right before Omicron hit. They started to kind of like let things trickle in, right? But, I wanted to discuss with you guys. I know both of you have traveled to Japan recently, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this, because we all three of us have traveled since, late spring, early summer to Japan. But what are some of the current travel restrictions for those that don't know? And maybe they're listening and haven't been following the news and haven't seen all the updates as they've come up. What are some of the ones that, really kind of outside the obvious one of no tourism visas, right? You can't just show up anymore like you could as an American. And do you need tourist visas for Canadians and for England and whatnot? Or is it similar where you can just kind of show up?
No, for here in the UK, the pre-COVID arrangement was that we had the reciprocal arrangement with Japan. So you could just turn up as long as your passport was valid. I think you had to have 6 months on your passport. No visa required was the old school way.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same as America.
Yeah, that's the same with Canada as well.
Okay. I was pretty sure, but I was like, let me just double check. But yeah, other than that, I mean, some of the updates, and as we're recording this, was the day we're recording is August 26th. So the release may be within the next few weeks, and things could change again. They just had updates like 2 days ago, announced by Prime Minister Kishida. And do you think those updates are going to make a big impact? And for those that aren't aware, the updates, the primary ones were, up until this point, PCR requirements for pre-departure was needed for pretty much everybody. You had to take a PCR test within 72 hours of your departure time for your flight to Japan from wherever it was. That was a requirement, and that's going away for folks who have received one booster shot. And I believe that's September 7th is the start date?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And then another thing that kind of came out with that is increasing the daily entry cap from 20,000 people daily to 50,000, which is over double, obviously. And that could happen as soon as September. Maybe by the time this releases, it'll already have happened. But do you think these changes will make a substantial impact? I know financially, a lot of people, there's like Facebook groups out there for like Return to Japan where they kind of talk about, preparing for your trip over there, what you need to do. I know the PCRs, especially for families traveling back, it's a very big financial impact, right? Like you have to take the test, and those aren't cheap. At least in the US, they're not cheap. In England and in Canada, do you have to pay a substantial price to get a PCR test done? So
in Canada, when I flew back to Japan in April, it cost me about the equivalent of $100 US.
Okay. And that was just for the normal PCR test?
Well, in my case, it was the test plus filling out the specific form that the Japanese government had.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I can't remember. I forget what the price was here in the UK, but they were, as ever with these things, it will become commercialized very quickly.
Yeah.
So there was bands of pricing, and what we did do, we had to source. There was only 2 places anywhere near us. We live in Kent in the southeast of England. There was one at a local shopping centre, a short train ride away, or drive, and the next one was in London, 30 miles away. So we went to the local one, and when we got there, one of the options, we decided this in advance because you had to pre-book, but one of the options was if you wanted to get the result the same day, to be confident that you weren't going to have an issue, or if you did have an issue, you could rebook one, you paid a bit more. So we wanted that peace of mind, so we did pay a bit extra to get the result the same day. So we got the result. We had our appointment about 11 o'clock in the morning, got our result by 10:30 that evening. So we thought that was worth paying a bit extra for.
Yeah, that's great. And I know, that's the one thing here is that up until now, I feel like they've kind of like loosened up a little bit in terms of what's approved for a PCR test. Before it was because I know my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, when they came to visit last year, they had to do the same thing. They had to do the PCR test prior to going back. And it had to be a PCR test with a stamp or a signature of a doctor or physician or a nurse or some health practitioner from that facility that you had it done. And they had to fill out that form.
We had to do the same sort of thing here.
But now it sounds like you don't need a signature anymore. You just need the form detailing what kind of test it was and the date it was administered and whatnot. You don't need that signature anymore. It's a little bit easier. I know for us, if you go to like a urgent care, it's hard to chase down like the person to fill out the form. They may not fill it out until you get the results, but the results are sent digitally. So you have to go back and then get them to hand sign it or something like that. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. But again, now it's not the signature isn't as required. In some cases here, you can go and do like the rapid test. Be careful, but obviously after September 7th, you may not need it, but you could do rapid tests, which is what we ended up doing. We went through the drive-through rapid test at our local Walgreens drugstore. And again, we had a pre-book. And I think those do cost about $150 or $100. We had been a close contact with somebody earlier that week. So we put that on the appointment. I think when you do that, it bills to insurance. So hopefully we don't get a bill. Hopefully insurance will cover that. We figured kick that can down the road a little bit. Now, for the updates of the daily cap, do you think that, going from 20,000 to 50,000, do you think that there's going to be a huge wave of people that come in that fill and meet that cap? Or is that something that they're maybe just doing preemptively for another move down the line?
My take on it, Doug, is that the cap in itself isn't the major barrier. The problem at the moment is still the bar on fully independent travel. You can travel on a tourist visa at the moment, as I understand it, but you've got to have a guided tour through a registered travel agent in Japan. So the Japanese government basically recognizes certain travel agents, and if you're booking through those, then that's an option for you. But there is that 20,000 people per day cap. But the big problem, I think, just is based on feedback from my subscribers and what I'm seeing on social, really, and the people I'm chatting to in the sort of travel industry, is that it's really this complete bar on fully independent, old school travel tourist visits that's the problem. And until that particular one is addressed, I don't think there's going to be a huge glut. The 50,000 will help, and some of that will fill up. But I've seen all sorts of stats showing that, I think it was in June, there were 252 people went in on tourist visas in Japan in June. That's just ridiculous. Yeah. And these were because that was when it was on more restricted guided tours. So, these numbers are just laughable in the fact, if you go back to what Abe was saying before the pandemic and, a couple of years back, Japan was aiming for 40 million tourists a year.
Right.
So, these numbers are less than a drop in the ocean. But they'll help. But I think my personal take on it is, until they allow fully independent travel, you're not going to see a big jump, because a lot of people are just put off by these requirements. And even most recent announcement a couple of days ago seems to cause some confusion as to what is and isn't permitted. And the government websites aren't up to date as yet anyway, with clear guidance.
Yeah, and I'm actually curious how often they actually hit that cap daily, if they're getting even close to it. I know during the summer, a lot of Japanese nationals who live abroad, like us, like my wife and our kids, we went back because of summer break. So maybe during the summer there's a higher rush of travelers, but going forward during like the school years and all that stuff, how often I wonder how frequently those caps are going to actually even be kind of hit or close to being hit.
Yeah. So as I understand it, they use the cap sort of in terms of flight scheduling. So they try to do it ahead of time. So it's not a matter of how many people are going to show up on a given day, but they have an idea in advance. So if there's too many, they'll cancel a flight or they'll reschedule it to arrive the next day to try to keep everything below the 20,000 ahead of time.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
well, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's a good point, Alan, because what happened earlier on in the year was Japan Airlines and ANA in particular were lobbying the government because they were selling flights on their websites, but working to the restrictions for entry that the government was setting. And as you were saying, Doug, that in those early parts of the year, this was a lot of Japanese nationals just going back visiting relatives, that kind of thing. So there wasn't a lot of volume. But as soon as things started to ease pre-Omicron, then this really had to be addressed, and so there was a bit of a clear negotiation going on between the airlines, obviously not just the Japanese airlines, but those were the primary candidates, with the Japanese government to make sure that literally people like ourselves who were booking these tickets weren't going to turn up and then say, actually, we've reached our daily cap, you can't come in, because that's what would have happened. So the idea, I mean, literally, I was getting emails because I'm registered with ANA and JAL, and I was getting emails from them saying, oh, the government increased the cap. And this was when it was months ago, and it was only a small increase. But they were saying, oh, we're now releasing more seats. So there was a direct correlation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking, and we're going to touch on this a little bit later when we talk about the future of tourism and the future of travel to Japan. But I really, I think this cap move is more of a preemptive for something else down the line. This is to, like Allan said, to help airlines prepare to have the seats available for when they do maybe inevitably open things up a little bit more. But yeah, so before we move on, did y'all have anything else you want to talk about those updates or any travel restrictions that we didn't touch on?
No, not really. I just think the only thing that I've seen that's been debated quite a bit on social in the last couple of days since the latest announcement was just this trying to get some clarification over what exactly a guided tour is being defined as at the moment, and the government hasn't defined it. That's the key thing. They're putting a lot of emphasis on the travel agents. So you could come in, as my understanding of it, my reading of it and talking to industry professionals locally in Japan, is that if you're going through the travel agent, basically they vet you on behalf of the government, see your COVID risk, see effectively your flight risk. You have to submit your sort of travel plans in advance, and if you get their approval, they'll issue you with the visa, and then they kind of monitor, in inverted commas, your tour, as it were. Now, what that exactly entails, whether it's hands-on or whether it's remotely, is
daily
the bit that seems to be, is the bit that seems to be being debated at great length. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if within another week we get a clarification statement from the government, because it's created a lot of confusion online in the last couple of days.
They're gonna put a tracker on you once you get in.
Well, they did with the SOS app, didn't they?
I was about to say they track you with those apps already, and we're gonna touch on that too. That's my SOS, right? My POS. Sorry. Yeah, so you had touched on this earlier. We talked about the tourism visas pretty much only being available to those on small guided tours. But there are other visas that are available currently that are acceptable for entry into Japan. The small guided tour tourism one. Rob, both of us went in on our previous trip on spousal visas, and also for family visa. So it could be a spouse, could be a child. And then I've heard stories of some people getting approved for like kind of extended family in certain circumstances. I think you have to meet like someone's ill or there's a ceremony or some kind of big event or something's happened where you're maybe a cousin or an uncle or whatever, and you're able to travel on a family visa. But that, again, you'd have to apply through your consulate or your embassy to really and talk to them and see if they approve it. Because from what it sounds like, it's very much decentralized in terms of who is given the visa. And it's determined not by like the central government, but like these kind of different embassies and consulates, and the mercy of whoever's approving and working those. Because some people are very by the book, and then other people have been a little bit loose, and not as rigid in terms of following all the requirements. So that's something I've noticed, and I don't know if it's the same in England, but
yeah, I mean, what was quite interesting was I've actually pulled out my paperwork that I got from the Japanese embassy, because this is all a completely new journey for me. It was, as you said, you just used to sort of make your booking and turn up and fly, and it was all okay. This time I had to make 2 visits to the Japanese embassy, and they actually gave you you're in for trouble when on the website there's a document you download which is items required for temporary visitor visa application, and there are 12 points to it. There's multiple sub-points, and a part of all of this is making 2 trips to the visa, or for me, the Japanese embassy in London. So there's a whole bunch of things hoops we had to jump through. One, for example, things that were, I really didn't mind, but I know some people would get quite upset by the level of intrusion, if you like, into the personal situation. But I don't know what it was like in the States, but our embassy was requiring us to evidence 3 months of bank statements to show that you weren't turning up without enough cash to sustain you for the period of travel that you were in the country for. I mean, the visas they were being issued at the time were as much as they would be. So they would be up to the valid 90 days, which is be the standard maximum visa length. As it happens, I was only there for a month. But, that kind of level of scrutiny was required as part of the documentation evidence process in advance, which was really unusual and strange to me. But of course, I just complied.
Yeah. I think for the most part, it was a little different for me because we could actually mail ours in, but maybe that's just we were sending it to a consulate, and Louisiana falls under the umbrella of the Nashville consulate, so we'd have to go directly through them. So I was able to get all the documentation together. My mother-in-law sent our Koseki Tohon, the family register, from Japan over to us, so that way we had that document. And fortunately, they did away with like a guarantor or someone writing a letter for you, a sponsor, basically saying that, yep, I'm the person that they're coming to visit, blah, blah, blah. That used to be a requirement, not so much anymore.
Yeah, I had that, and we still had to do that. And we had to get a letter sent from Japan, which didn't arrive in time because there was all the postal disruption. And of course, when we turned up at the embassy, but this is typical of Japanese bureaucracy. I'm sure you guys have probably come across this in the past. But once I turned up, my wife, I was really wanting to do it by the book. I was like, got to do this, got to get that, got to tick this box, and all the rest of it. And my wife was saying, they won't ask for that level of detail. Just show that you've made an effort, kind of thing. And for example, we also had to submit a detailed itinerary. So we didn't really have much detailed plan. So I just put the bare basics. And when I got to the embassy, can't remember if it was first or second time, probably the first time, so I was taking my evidential paperwork in. And I said, I don't have the letter from my family member in Japan yet because of the postal strike. And they said, that's fine. When you go, pick it up in person. And when you get back and you've returned to the UK, just post it to us. So this was something you're supposed to have in advance to get approval for the visa. And they would say, no, just go, pick it up, bring it back to the UK, and then post it to us when you get back. So there was a lot of that kind of thing happening.
Yeah. I was stressed out about it too. Like I never applied for, and I had when I did JET, but I think the consulate kind of took care of a lot of that stuff for us. And same when I studied abroad, I think the school kind of applied for us on our behalf, and we just had to send some, pictures and some information. So this is the first time doing it by myself. Obviously my wife helped me with some of the documents that we needed to prepare, but yeah, it wasn't too intimidating of a form. It was just, I wanted to make sure all the T's are dotted I's are dotted, T's are crossed, because I had to mail it off. And then I was paying extras to make sure that it got there with no problems. And then we had to put in a return postage prepaid envelope in the thing we were sending. But if I had missed something or failed to document something right, I probably would have to resend something. And I just didn't want to go through all that hassle. So I was a little worried about that. Now, my kids, they're Japanese citizens and U.S. citizens. They have the dual citizenship right now. My oldest son just turned 5 or last summer, just turned 6 now. But his passport expired, so we had to get a new one. And then our second son, we hadn't had a Japanese passport for yet, so we applied for that as well. But unlike the visas where we could just mail it off and they mail it back to me, we actually had to drive to Houston, which is about a 6-hour drive west of New Orleans, to go physically pick. We could mail it to them, but we had to physically pick it up from them. And we got there, they open at 9. We got there at 9:01, and the line was already 40 people deep.
Wow.
To wait to get into the office. And fortunately, they kind of had, a lot of people were going in to apply for the first time in person. We had already done all that, so we kind of got to cut the line a little bit. But the whole requirement is that you have to go in person, so the person who is receiving the passport can physically be handed that passport. They wouldn't do this. They wouldn't mail it. You had to go. The consular's office would come down from Nashville to New Orleans for one day every 6 months, and they would have an official, if you have documents that you need to get done or whatever, this is the day we're going to be here. Come out and we'll take care of it. So we had to do that for my oldest son the first time with his passport. We had to go and physically receive it from them. They placed it on top of him. Because he's 6 months old at that point. He couldn't hold anything. So it's just kind of funny, but it wasn't too bad. More than more than we're used to. And hopefully by the next time I go to Japan, I won't have to worry about the spousal visa again. But we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But they also have other visas that are available. Student visas, which were a big topic, a hot topic for a long time. Academics weren't able to get over there to study, really hindering the exchange programs and whatnot, and I think hurting the educational system in the long run by turning so many kids away. And So I feel like a lot of people maybe shifted away from their interest in Japan and sent that over to Korea or just moved on with their life. So student visas are option. But then, Allan, this is where you come in. You actually, when you traveled back in, was it May when you left or April?
End of April.
End of April. You went on a business visa, correct?
Yes.
So can you kind of talk us through that process? Because I have no idea. And I mean, maybe it's similar to the extent of, the documents you need to turn in. But like, are there any big differences that you're aware of that make business visas unique?
I think the one big difference was that I had to get something called an ERFS certificate from a business sponsor in Japan, and it's similar to what the students have to get as well. Basically, it's a guarantor form where business registered with the government will take your details and they'll, in essence, vouch for you, register your details with the government, and you'll be issued a certificate with a unique serial number, which is required then to get the appointment with. In my case, anyway, I had to actually get that certificate number first before I could even make an appointment to drop off my forms at the consulate in Toronto.
Okay.
And then, basically, it's the business the business that's standing in for you is in essence guaranteeing that they'll be responsible for if you get sick or if you run out of money. It's sort of like the old school guarantor form. And then otherwise, it was a lot of the similar documents that you guys were mentioning with had to do the detailed daily itinerary, flight itinerary, accommodation information. I had to get a letter, employment letter. I don't think they required proof of income, but I think that was an optional form. They needed to see a bank statement.
When you provided your itinerary, I mean, you were there for 3 months?
Yeah.
So did you provide a 3-month itinerary, or did you just provide a week?
No, so I had asked them if I could do it. I had a general idea of what I had or where I would be ahead of time. So I asked them if I could do it in ranges, weeks 1 to 3, I'll be in Toyotashi, and then after that in Yokohama. They're like, no, you have to do it. You have to do it daily. But they said you don't have to go into too much detail. They just need to know where you'll be on any given day.
Oh, okay.
It was more about which city you'll be in.
Okay, so it's not so much like, hey, at 9 a.m. I'm going to be going to Starbucks, and 9:30 I'm going to be going to this. You have to break it down to that granular.
Don't put it out.
You never know. You never know, man.
Yeah, it was more like okay, on Monday I've got a meeting.
Yeah.
Tuesday I'll take the train to Kamaishi, and just things like that, just sort of broad strokes of what you'll be doing.
Okay.
But they wanted it for every single day except weekends, which they said you could just put weekend, free time.
Oh,
because obviously you're not a hazard at weekends.
Yeah.
it's a vacation.
But they did need to know where I would be on the weekend, where my hotel was.
Oh, okay. So did you do that for the entire, were you planning on staying 3 months, or did you extend that while you were there?
I had planned on staying probably the full 3 months. I had a lot of work to catch up on after 2 years of being away.
Sure.
So for the most part, they didn't follow up. So I think it was more for the first week or two, because I had to do the quarantine at the time.
Right.
So it was more, where are you going to be your first week? And then after that, it was. I think they were a bit more relaxed.
Were they still? They were still quarantining at that point. I can't remember. I know they did away with it. It
was the very tail end of the quarantine. I think they ended it 2 or 3 weeks after I got there.
Lucky you, huh?
Yeah. Although in my case, I qualified for the shortened one, so I only had to do it for 3 days.
Okay, that's not too bad.
It wasn't too bad, and get over the jet lag.
Yeah, and I actually saw. I think it's part of one of the updates. It's not actually the official update, but that the government is also looking to, and this is more for people who do come in close contact or have COVID with and without symptoms. They're shortening similar to how the US has kind of shortened the time that you need to isolate. They're looking to change that recommendation too, based off of, I guess, studies and things like that. And honestly, around the world, I don't even think the US even gives a crap anymore about how long you isolate. They don't follow up or check. I think it's 5 days, or it used to be 5 days. If you had COVID, you had to be out, and maybe shorter now. I have no idea. I work from home, so I don't. If I were to ever get COVID, I'm pretty much isolating already before I even do anything. So I'm not worrying too much about that. But yeah, that's one of the things that I just, when you mentioned the quarantine, kind of popped into mind.
Yeah, so for the business visa, and I'm not trying to pry too much or get too in the weeds on how your arrangement, but I know some folks are looking to do business in Japan. And did you already have a pre-existing contact that you were working with that was able to do that, or are there services out there that help connect people who are looking to do business in Japan find that kind of guarantor?
So I think officially it's the former, but I wouldn't be surprised if the latter existed out there. Like, it's, as I understand it, the system's more like you don't have to be an employee or contractor of these companies. It could just be, are you going to, a conference or a meeting with a business that you intend to do business with?
Right.
Like one of the guy who's sitting next to me on my flight over, he was going over for 5 days on a sales call. And the company that he was going to visit, they acted as his ERFS guarantor. Even though, totally different companies, he doesn't work for them. It was just like, we need this guy to come here so we can buy his products or sell our products to him.
Basically like a guarantor service,
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily that situation, but like if you could find someone maybe interested, they could and they're willing to sponsor you, then it's all fair game, right?
Yeah. Like, as I understand it, as long as you actually get that certificate, I don't think they scrutinize it too much, but I mean, as long as it's a legitimate business.
Sure.
Extending, because the business has to register with the government for that program.
I gotcha.
And once they're approved, whoever they invite, I mean, I guess at their own risk, it's basically a formality. It's the hard part is actually getting that certificate.
Okay, so that's the big step.
Yeah. And after that, it's just paperwork.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that's great. Because I wasn't really sure what went into that ERSF process, and I think you mentioned to me yesterday that process is starting to go digital, which it kind of blew my mind. Surprised we don't have to fax it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so someone had sent me the link that for Canadian and American citizens that they're doing the e-visa now. You can apply online and just upload all your forms. And it said 5 working days you can get an electronic visa. You just show your smartphone at the border, and
wow.
it stands in for the current physical visa that they actually affix to your passport.
Interesting. I mean, I personally like having that visa in my passport, but
I like that too.
But the process sounds so much nicer.
It does sound a lot more. It looks like, I was looking on the Foreign Ministry's website, and it seems very streamlined.
Yeah.
But I mean, still with all the same restrictions of, you need that letter of invite. If you're going as a tourist, you need the tour group registration and all that.
The unfortunate guided tour group, right?
Yeah.
So let's kind of, now that we've got our visa, we're ready to go. Did you guys have any issues with your flights? Because I know there's horror stories out there of flight cancellations and things like that. Did you have any problems getting actually out the door?
Not for us. But I was super anxious because of this, negative PCR test, the 72 hours prior to departure and so on. So, but we got our green light with, I think it was 2 days to spare because we did it on the earliest opportunity. So we had that peace of mind. So there was getting to the airport, and then it was just a question of, what would it be like? But, we flew out of London Heathrow through to Haneda in Tokyo. And it was just obviously super quiet at London Heathrow, which was, was actually one of the fringe benefits of the whole pandemic thing. But but no, actually we were lucky. It was all pretty smooth.
That's good.
And we were flying with Japan Airlines, so we were sticking with the Japanese airlines to try and minimize the risk, and that's usually a very good thing to do.
Sure.
Yeah, it was pretty much the same flying out of Toronto. It was funny. The flight I got was actually the first direct flight that Air Canada had back to Japan in something like 2 years, because they had heavily restricted their flights from Canada to Japan. You always had to connect in Vancouver during the pandemic. And when I went at the end of April, it was the first direct flight back to Tokyo. And yeah, security took a while to get through, but otherwise, flight was about half full. It seemed like mostly returning citizens to Japan. But yeah, getting out the door wasn't too bad.
No, I was just going to say, the only problem we faced, I don't know how this affected your side of the water, but with the war in the Ukraine, what would normally be a 12-hour direct flight from here in the UK ended up being closer to something like 16 hours. So we were flying with Japan Airlines from London. You'd normally fly north over Sweden and then turn right and fly over Russia for about 9 hours before just sort of turning south over China and then down into Japan. But with the no-fly zone over the Russian airspace, pre-flight JAL had been indicating that they were simply going to just fly further north to avoid Russia. But actually, once we were in the air, the flight plan changed. Where you can see the thing real time on the camera, on the in-flight stuff. So our flight plan headed south. So we went down over southern Europe, and then we out sort of Ankara, Baku, and then over the Caspian Sea, the Aral Sea, north of Tashkent, Samarkand, Ulaanbaatar. It was really, really unusual, and it ended up being just 10 minutes shy of 16 hours. So that in itself was the most sort of unusual thing. But it was kind of, as someone who loves traveling, flying all over these places, and of course you then had, with Japan Airlines, you got the option to switch to camera. So we were looking down and you could see these huge, the Caspian Sea and things like this out through the camera, which was great. So that was quite novel. But I'm a pretty good flyer, so I rarely get nervous. But we did experience quite a lot of turbulence during our flight. Sure. So that was a little bit off-putting. But it was okay. A couple of films, a couple of naps. We got there.
There you go. And we don't have, from New Orleans, we don't have a direct flight, so we got to do two legs. We did here to LA, and then we had like a 6-hour layover, which with kids is great because you kind of need that. That was fun. But yeah, like I think our biggest issue that we ran into was when we flew Singapore Air, not a Japanese airline. We flew out of LAX to Narita. And they asked for proof of like the PCR or whatever, and I showed them the actual document from Walgreens that they've sent us the PDF. I printed it out, and they wouldn't take that, which is weird because it had all the information on there. But then it said Rapid Nat. It was basically the Rapid Nat PCR, but like they didn't say that on the paper. So I fortunately had the MOFA form with me as well because we didn't need it for the MySOS, and we actually kind of bypassed MySOS. So I'm gonna circle back to that in a second. But we didn't need it to upload. So it got approved just with the Walgreens document. So I didn't think we would need it, but I'm glad I brought it with me because that ended up saving us. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, my wife pointed out the same things. She'd heard the same sort of horror stories. So we had paperwork backups for everything. Yeah. And we made sure that they were showing exactly, the version that they needed to see at the gate.
Yeah, and I agree with pre-flight PCR anxiety that came with it because our son was in summer camp for like 5 weeks, 6 weeks or whatever. Up until that point, he had a week off prior to having to do the PCR. Our trip was supposed to be at the end of July. Due to some other like schooling circumstances and whatnot, we had to push our trip up 2 weeks earlier, and that 2 weeks was going to be our like kind of like hunker down and limit our exposure to the outside world, so that way we can pass our PCR test with flying colors. But that didn't happen since we had to move our trip. And our test was like less than a week after he finished summer camp. And wow, I was just so nervous and paranoid that something would happen. That he would get, he'd get COVID from some kid at camp, and then we'd get COVID and show up on the PCR. And the exorbitant amount of change fees we had just paid would have had to be used again to change the flight because of a bad PCR or something like that. But fortunately, we all passed and got negatives. But the anxiety from those was just crazy. So I'm sure a lot of people are going to appreciate not having to worry about that anymore. Going back to MySOS that we talked about a little bit earlier, that process is something that's been in place, it sounds like, for a while, although it has evolved as well, similar to the entry requirements. Originally, it sounded like you needed 3 apps, right? You needed Skype, you needed MySOS, and something else, where they would check in with you twice a day to make sure that you're quarantining or whatever. Is that right? And I don't know if any of you guys traveled during the time when it happened originally, but I want to say I heard stories about that from my sister.
There were 2 apps that we needed. It was MySOS, and then the other one, which I forget the name of off the top of my head. But my wife sort of interpreting what sort of other Japanese nationals were saying through their travel experience was that you'll need the MySOS to get into the country basically and through onto the plane. But the other one, there seemed to be quite a bit of flexibility with. But I just did everything by the book anyway, just to have it with me. Basically, when we got there, I just let it sort of sit on my phone, but I didn't really. It was supposed to kind of like ping you every day or something, but it didn't happen. So it was only really down to the MySOS. Here in the UK, we had to get documents through the NHS, the health service, And then we had to use some QR codes to get printouts, and then the printouts we had to scan, and the scans had to go into the app. And of course, if anyone's using my SOS app, literally the whole app changes color as you progress through the approval process. So it starts off red just to make it absolutely clear that you're not clear to go. Then you upload some more documents and evidence and all the rest of it, and it turns orange. So you're getting to the amber stage, so you're getting closer. And then finally, once you've got all the bits of evidence that you need to show that you're a safe human being for travel, then it turned green, and that was good to go.
Yeah. And that was, I think that was the biggest part, is everyone was like, I just can't wait for my screen to turn green or blue, whatever color it was. Like, I just can't wait for that screen to turn, so I know I have peace of mind that my all my documentation is good to go.
Yeah.
That was, I think, again, part of the anxiety a lot of people had, just all this documentation you had to get, and you only had a short window. Although my SOS, you could do in advance, right? You could do everything in advance except for the PCR. So you can kind of take care of all your prep, weeks before your flight even. You would just need your PCR test you would have to upload. Like vaccination history. I don't think I had to take a picture of my card. I think you just had to put when you got the vaccine and which vaccine it was. Pretty much once you get in Japan, like you said, you don't really need it. At least now. You get a pop-up saying like something that your time has expired or whatever in terms of like my SOS like tracker thing. I think it's still on my phone. I didn't remove it yet, but
it's another little travel memento, is it?
Right. It's like all those other apps I download, use once, and forget to uninstall. And it's still there. But you really didn't need it once you got through the process where they look at your My SOS and you show them your documents and whatnot, your passport. They look at it and they clear you and they give you your "you're free to not quarantine" card, and good to go. Because that's one thing too. They have blue countries, which are ones that don't require quarantine, and then there's some other countries that do. I think all of us were fine, but in terms of blue countries, any listeners out there in other countries, you may want to just double check.
So when I went, it was back before they had the blue country, red country.
Oh, that's right.
System. Yeah. So in my case, I had to use the My SOS app. Once you actually get in the country, it changes. Like the app itself changes, and it's got it tracks your location, and if you're in quarantine, a few times a day it will call you and you have to answer, and either there's a person on the other end or it's like an AI system.
Yeah.
And you have to center yourself in the camera and show that you're in your hotel room or your apartment or your house, and it records you for 30 seconds and then the call disconnects.
Crazy.
And then once your quarantine is complete, they send a notification saying, okay, it's going to switch back to the old or the original form of the My SOS app. The tracking stuff all stops, and you're free to go as of like 12:01 tomorrow.
I think that's the notification I got. It was like 5 days later after I got to Japan, maybe 5 or 7, I don't remember, but I just remember getting a pop-up and I was like, what's this? And then it was just basically, don't worry about it anymore. Yeah, that's I remember hearing that, and I remember hearing people earlier too saying you needed like a Skype call. They would call you on Skype too, and I don't know if maybe that was part of maybe they integrated it with My SOS or whatever.
I think they did when I was there, so this is like end of April, start of May. You had to have Skype, My SOS, and then I think the other app was like a close contact app called Coco.
Okay.
And I never had to use that app. It was just all the phone calls came through the My SOS app. When I was at the airport, they did make sure I had Skype installed, I guess in case they couldn't reach me through the app. You're supposed to have the backup.
Gotcha. That was it. Yeah, I remember that now.
Okay. Yeah, I remember Skype was in place somehow. I wasn't sure if it was integrated into the app or if it's just like a backup plan. But thank goodness that's not in place anymore though, right? So once you arrived to Japan, what was the airport like for you? And Narita, it was a ghost town. Like, I've never gotten through immigration that fast in my entire life. And I've traveled to Japan probably 2 handfuls of times, and I've never gotten through that fast. It was insane. Even when I had my re-entry permits, because those were kind of quick. But on a tourist visa or some other visa, never gotten through that quick. And then same thing with customs. That's usually pretty simple and easy and quick, but that was, no problem at all either.
And when did you fly, Doug?
Back in July, middle of July.
Because we were out end of May. We flew out and arrived. I can't remember the exact date, but it was towards the end of May. And for me, it was the opposite, complete opposite. It's the longest it's ever taken me to get into the country. And actually, I would even go so far as to say it was unsettling when we arrived, because the entire terminals, so that part of the terminal for the arrivals was dedicated to the flights obviously coming in from Europe. And everywhere in that arrivals lounge that you would normally just walk in, show your passport and go through, that was like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. And this, I don't want to be alarmist, but this was what it was like. It was unbelievable. So we were shepherded right off the plane, and there was a huge queue, and we were all shuffling along slowly. We had to get our sort of documentation out, the actual paper documentation. They wanted to see the paper documentation as well as the SOS app. And when we got to the actual gate, one entire gate had been converted into a test area. So they had these kind of makeshift tents, but this was huge. I mean, this was like probably a couple of 100 meters long. So they were doing multiple tests real time. And so we all had to do a saliva test as we entered this area. And that was then to be tested real time. And you had to wait in that area before you could be given approval to go through. So we were all given a ticket number to coincide with our test result. And there's a big screen showing the ticket numbers and whether you got the green tick to go through. And mine came through within about half an hour, but my wife's, hers didn't come up. And time went by. We arrived at about 9 o'clock in the evening, local time in Haneda. And it took 3 hours for my wife's result to come through. She went back to speak to somebody and she had to do a second test, I think. But it took ultimately 3 hours. So we're sitting there, just surviving on what we could get out of a vending machine that was just there. We were starving hungry. So it took us 3.5 hours actually to get through that. And it was just so surreal. The whole experience was really, really strange. And I'd never seen that kind of level of control over movement before.
That was about the same for me as well at the end of April. We got off the plane, and unfortunately our flight had been delayed about half an hour in Toronto. And in that brief window, a very full United flight had landed ahead of us. So that was an extra 300 people ahead of us in line.
Jeez.
So even with having my SOS app being green and all that, it still took me, I landed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I think I left the airport just before 8 o'clock at night. And the big delay was waiting for the in-airport rapid test results. Mine took probably an hour just because there were so many people.
Yeah, and they don't do that anymore, right? We didn't. I think maybe it depends on your vaccination status and which country you're coming from or whatnot. But they still had at Narita, they had the section where people would sit, like they had the chairs lined up against the wall, kind of spaced out, socially distant and everything. But no one was. I don't recall seeing anyone getting tested. But our flight wasn't really super crowded. I mean, it was crowded, but it wasn't a full flight. And I think most of the passengers on our flight were passing through Japan to go somewhere else, since we were flying Singapore Air, not like a Japanese airline. It was kind of a pass-through. So they let everyone off that was staying in Japan first. And then I think others, if they had a layover or change or something, they would let off after. But they were letting pretty much anyone that was trying to disembark in Japan get off and get through the process first. But yeah, they didn't do any of that. And maybe that's why it was so quick.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have to worry about that. We walked past where they used to do it. They did a temperature check, I think, right before we went to immigration, and that was it.
My wife had sort of checked with friends and others that had traveled, and so we anticipated this. And what we would normally do was just do a transfer to go, because we would normally actually fly into Kansai International, but that wasn't an option because those flights had just been fully cancelled. There was no flights into Kansai International, so we would have normally just gone into Haneda and then hopped over to Itami. And transferred there. So that's what we were going to do, but we anticipated this in advance. So we ended up we pre-booked a hotel at the airport. So we weren't that anxious. It was a pain, and we had to go through that delay, but we weren't anxious because we anticipated it and booked that hotel. But we walked through Haneda, and actually one of the things I did do a video which is on my YouTube channel of walking through Haneda, because it was just an absolute ghost town, like you say. Yeah. It was just, I'd never seen Haneda like it. I mean, there were just a handful of people that were flying out, sort of locals looking to go to sort of, Korea or China or where internationally. But it was absolutely empty. So I walked all the way through the airport doing a walking video, and they've got, where they have that old Edo style sort of the bridge and all that village and that kind of thing. It was all completely closed and empty. Yeah. Very, very strange.
Yeah, Narita was kind of the same. Like the marketplaces in Terminal, I think it was Terminal 2 where we flew out of, kind of the little souvenir shops and whatnot, they were all shuttered up and closed. And I think some of them were open, but they closed early. But still, it was crazy because I'm so used to when I'm flying out of Narita, those shops in that area was always booming. So it was really weird to see. It was like a bizarro world.
I was going to say that was the same for me when I was flying back to Canada end of July. Like Narita was empty, the departure, and this was Terminal 1, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, the terminal was just empty. A lot of the shops were closed.
Yeah, I think McDonald's and Starbucks were like the only things really open. Like cockroaches, right? They just stay, they're everywhere. And So while you guys were in Japan, what were you able to do? Where did you go? What were some noticeable differences from like pre-COVID times? What was like something that surprised you, good or bad, and limitation wise or anything like that? Just you don't have to go too in depth with it, but if you want to just talk a little bit about your individual trips and some things of what to expect or what you didn't expect going back over there.
Yeah, so for me, it was I was tossing up at the time prior to going out whether to go on a business visa or spouse visa. So I ended up going on a spouse visa. So the idea for us was really to just try and spend time with my wife's mother, stay with her most of the time. She's based out of, so we were based out of Ashiya, which is kind of between Kobe and Osaka in the Kansai area, Hyogo. So the aim was really to relax, but we ended up doing a lot more. And by the end of the month that I was there, I was pretty exhausted. I guess I couldn't help sort of going all out after being away for so long, because my last time I was in Japan was in January 2020, just 8 days on business. So the idea was not to travel around the country too much like we would normally do on a trip, which probably really wasn't legit on the visa that we were on at the time. So the idea was just to do a few day trips and overnights in the Hyogo area and in Tottori, that sort of area in the Chugoku region. So I did a day hiking in the Uji area outside of Kyoto. That was with a guy called Philip Jackson, who's written a series of books called Hidden Paths. That was excellent. That was a really nice thing to do. Spent a day on 2 walks in the mountains there. I loved doing that. And I also spent a day in Himeji. And I've been to the castle multiple times, so the purpose of that visit was to just do everything but the castle, really. And I went out into the countryside and saw a sword maker making samurai swords, which was incredible, and that was really, really amazing to see. And I went to a place called Engyoji Temple, which was featured in The Last Samurai, and more recently in a G.I. Joe film, Snake Eyes. I watched the film on Amazon before flying out, actually, because I knew I was going there. It's not a great film, but it makes extensive use of real locations, actually. So for that purpose alone, it's worth watching. So it was really kind of, mostly kind of just chilling out for us. And then obviously visiting a few of my favourite haunts and local bars and stuff. Kobe is a big place that I go to. It's kind of a bit like my second home. So just visiting some places around there, really.
Cool. Well, did you notice anything, like what had changed, I guess, for you, or what was something that you noticed? It was different from like what you had been before. Yeah,
well, the thing that I did notice was, aside from all the big chain stuff, all the familiar independent shops, bars, restaurants, and so on, most of those were opening only for a handful of days each week because of the coronavirus, because of the lack of trade. So a lot of them are typically only opening Thursday to Sunday. Mm-hmm. And in Kobe, there's one of my favourite bars is a place called Mokuba's Tavern, and they were not only open fewer days, they were doing shorter hours, and we noticed they'd removed some of the tables because they just didn't need that many covers, and it's a tiny place anyway. They've probably only got about 8 tables, so they've taken it down to like 6 or something. And the reason they'd done that was to free up some space for selling merchandise, because they'd started just as another revenue stream. So they started selling their own coffee cups, their own lemonade, their own books, this kind of thing, as just a way to get a bit more revenue into the business. So that was quite sad, but, at the same time, quite sort of inventive to see them sort of responding. Everyone keeps saying people are pivoting in business, and this was like a real world example of it. But then on the other hand, which was really interesting, but again, this was all pre-pandemic, this was lined up. At Sannomiya Station in Kobe, there's a big sort of train terminal area there. There was a brand new Hankyu train station and skyscraper hotel. And in fact, there's more to come. So literally in the 2 years that I hadn't been there, this new station had been, so the station was a renovation, but there was a brand new skyscraper hotel owned by a Hankyu Railway Corporation. And that had popped up in the last 2 years during the pandemic. So as ever with Japan, there was that kind of contrast, if you like, between, the sort of the struggle of the smaller independent businesses and yet still they always find money in Japan for these huge infrastructure projects, it seems.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that about the Hankyu train station. I went in to meet up with Jerome White, Jero. We did an episode with him earlier in the season. The first weekend I was there, and I was meeting up with him in Shibuya. And I never liked Shibuya Station to begin with. It's a mess, but I kind of knew my way around it. But they completely overhauled Shibuya Station, and I didn't know where the hell I was going, which exit to take anymore. So I got lost. I ended up coming out the way wrong end, and it was. But that was something too. That was completely different. Like Shibuya Station was completely overhauled. I think they had a giant new skyscraper that was right next door to. I forget the name of it.
Shibuya View, I think.
Yeah. All that was new. So it was just like kind of like, whoa, what the hell? So that was like a similar experience there. So Allan, what about you? What was something that I know you were there for 3 months, so you probably did a lot of stuff. But what were some of the notable things you did while you were over there?
So I was on like we were saying, I was on the business visa, so I had a lot of meetings with my editors. I did interviews with one guy a few times named Asby Brown. He's an architect professor in Tokyo.
He's also from New Orleans.
Oh, he's also from New Orleans. That's right. Yes, that's right.
Keeping it local.
Yeah. And interviewed the curator of the Tokyo Station Gallery, because they're doing an exhibit soon on the 150th anniversary of rail travel in Japan. So basically, like running down a lot of article ideas for the newspaper work that I do. Doing a lot of photos as well for those articles. And when I was out taking pictures, like just going around Tokyo, like that's when I noticed, like the big change I noticed was like just how less crowded everywhere seemed, whether it was Tokyo or Yokohama. I spent a lot of time in Toyota, which is near Nagoya in Aichi-ken. And it was just like some of the places like Shinjuku, like on a nice weekend night is normally packed, but this time it was just empty, and a lot of the long-standing restaurants and bars that had been there, they were all closed. Some of them had been there 30 plus years. But end of April, start of May, which I guess is around the start of the new business year, a lot of them had closed. But at the same time, like you guys were saying, Shinjuku Station has completed one of their big renovations. So like the East Gate is completely different from how it used to look.
Oh, really? Okay.
In Yokohama, they've got the Sky Cabin attraction now that goes from Minato Mirai. It's like the gondolas that go from the shopping arcade up to, I think it's about 1.5 kilometers away. But I hadn't seen that. I think that opened in 2020.
Okay.
A lot of new infrastructure, but a lot of long-standing smaller places that had been popular with tourists, I think in particular, had closed.
Yeah, that's something that I noticed too when I went to Tokyo. A lot of like smaller shops and whatnot kind of went under, especially like you said, the tourist ones.
Yeah, like arcades, bars, restaurants. The Uniqlo in Shinjuku, the big one. Like I think it was their flagship one. That one closed.
Oh, did it?
I think they're moving to a smaller location now.
Yeah.
But that was one of the places that was like heavily dependent on overseas tourists, and that closed at the end of June, I want to say.
Oh wow. I actually looked up. There was, I don't know if it was like a kind of like a tourist trap thing or anything like that, but like they used to have like a samurai museum in Kabukicho, in Shinjuku. And I went there once just because I was like looking for something to do, kill time with a friend of mine back in 2019 that summer, and it was kind of nice. It was interesting, but the most interesting part of that visit was my friend had some Jordans and he took them off and left them in the shoebox, right, like the open air shoebox where you just put your shoes when you go in. Came back, those Jordans were gone. Someone had jacked them. They had some other, they had it on tape. I don't know if they caught him actually doing it, but they had some folks that were kind of looking a little shady doing stuff. And we think they grabbed the shoes and just put them on and walked off with them because they were a nice pair, like pretty much brand new. Yeah, so that was probably the most interesting part of that trip was my buddy getting, not in a good way, getting his shoes stolen. And then they went, the staff of the place went to like the ABC Mart down the road and bought a pair of shoes for him. Yeah, so it's they felt horrible, and he was just like, I don't know what's going on. Like I never thought in my entire life that my shoes would get stolen. The shoes that I'm wearing, not even new shoes, but shoes that I'm wearing get stolen out of a random shoebox. But that place, I was curious if it was still open, and it looks like it closed down too. And I know a lot of other big Shinjuku kind of like the Robot Cafe or Robot Restaurant or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah.
That closed down. A lot of other places closed down too. So I think that's kind of those ones that are tourist driven really suffered the most.
Yeah, one thing that I did, which I specifically wanted to check out, was I revisited Universal Studios Japan, because the last, that's in Osaka for those that don't know, but the last time I was there, they were still building the Super Nintendo World, and it was going to open the month after I left. So I was really gutted I wasn't going to get to see it. Then, of course, the pandemic. And so it opened, I think, in March 2020, is it? I'm guessing something like that. Yeah, that sounds about right. And of course, they were just losing money hand over fist because so few people, this was obviously at the height of the pandemic. So it was the first Super Nintendo World anywhere in the world, and they were just not getting the custom. So I made a beeline to go there and check it out. So that was, so Universal Studios Japan itself was really quiet compared to the times I've been, about 5 times I've been, compared to previous trips.
Well, we went this last trip. We went for one day. We did the day trip, and it was packed.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, maybe I don't know if it's like pre-pandemic packed, but it was pretty crowded. Wait times are pretty substantial and all this stuff.
Yeah, the only thing about when I was there, the only bit that was super busy was Super Nintendo World. they were queuing to get in there, but everywhere else there were virtually no queues to get on any of the rides.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I went there as well, and it was I think I went maybe start of July, and it was, say, medium packed, like not like how it would have been pre-pandemic. Yeah. Like I think the wait times for the rides were about half an hour.
That's not bad.
Not too bad considering what they used to be. And yeah, Super Nintendo World was doing brisk business. But...
yeah, they're in a good spot. I think the whole USJ now, they're doing better. I mean, at least during the summer, because we went. It was the beginning of August, and that's like peak summer. Kids out of school, college kids going on break. Doing stuff. So they probably had a lot of traffic there. Yeah, that was the one. I don't want to say big trip that we did, but we did go there. For the most part of our trip, we stayed in Ibaraki. I don't know if you guys follow my personal Instagram, but I was posting pictures every day. I would go on Google Maps and find like a random place, like a shrine or some landmark, and I would run from my mother-in-law's house there and back. And then same thing when I was in Scuba, I did kind of the same thing, and just kind of exploring, which was really fun. It's hot. But, it was fun to explore and check out stuff that I hadn't really seen in those areas. So I did a lot of that. And then did kind of same thing around where I used to live. They had a shrine summer pilgrimage thing where you go and check out these certain shrines they call out. And I decided to walk all of them because I was crazy. And it was, again, I can go on. I'll say that for another time. But that was a really fun thing to explore and kind of just do that, because it was outdoors. It was something I could do that wouldn't really be too risky or anything like that. Because around the time when I was there, it was really spiking in terms of COVID. So I think a lot of people were hesitant to go out and do stuff. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just kind of go into nature and explore. That was a good chunk of my trip. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, you can go check it out. I shared some of the posts on the podcast feed too. But I think my biggest shock, and this is because I'm coming from the US, right? I got on the train in Tokyo and every single person was wearing a mask. And I think that was the biggest shock to me. Not that I was like not expecting that, but just I came from leaving New Orleans where our plane was like 98% unmasked. And the airports were, again, probably 80 to 90% unmasked, to everyone wearing a mask. That was like kind of visual shocking. I expected it. I had no doubt that was what it was going to be, but it was just to see that stark contrast between the two was, interesting.
Yeah. Even outdoors, yeah. I noticed but by near the end of my trip, the government had relaxed its guidance and said, if you're outdoors, you don't have to wear a mask. But still, like, everyone I saw outdoor, and this was in Toyota, everyone I saw was still wearing a mask outdoors in the parks, sidewalks. Yeah,
same here. And I noticed as well, Alan, individuals driving around in their cars were wearing masks. Seriously. Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, I know Japan obviously has that culture anyway of wearing masks. But yeah, it was 99% masked outside anywhere you went when I was there. The only thing I noticed, and similar when we were to what you were saying, Alan, when we were there, because it started heating up, but come June, the government was issuing announcements saying, look, there is a risk of health here because, people getting hot with the masks. Don't wear a mask if you're feeling hot. Take it off if you're outside, particular. But even with that notification, there was very little change. The only thing I would say is that I noticed when you get out into the suburbs or to the quieter places, and in the rural areas where we travel a great deal, then it wasn't quite as prevalent, but it was still,
it still had
the bottom. Yeah. I mean, it was still no less than 70% masked, I would say.
Yeah. So let's shift over from current travel situations to the future. Do you see any? I guess, do you have any bold predictions? And by bold, I mean, at this point, they're going to open up in 2022. That's like a bold prediction, right? I don't foresee that happening. But when do you think, like individual, like kind of free reign tourism, like it used to be, maybe back on the table? Do you see that happening within the next year?
Sure, in the next year, I think for sure. I mean, I'm always an optimist. If you'd have asked me a year ago, we'd have all been travelling out there now, unfettered. So I've got it wrong before, so don't trust me. But yeah, no, I think it will. By next year, I'm pretty sure it will be. Fully independent travel will be back. I mean, my take on things is I think Japan will bounce back massively, and from my subscribers and the communities that I run for the real Japan, the pent-up demand is huge. There's no doubt about it, but it is all dependent on fully independent travel. And what's interesting is I think here in the UK, the Japanese government's sort of still advertising Japan, travel to Japan, because obviously it's pre-booked this stuff years ago. But their travel theme that they're running here in the UK at the moment on one particular channel is to encourage people to go beyond Tokyo. And I do think that's a trend that we're going to see more of. So I think there will be more off the beaten path travel. And I think that's then going to go hand in hand with more sustainable travel. And that's obviously going to be partly enhanced by the whole pandemic that we've all been living through. So I think it will bounce back. And I think it will bounce back pretty quickly as soon as the doors are fully open, whenever that might be. But I do think people are going to be, not least because if they are cautious about being in crowded big cities, what better thing to do than to get out into the rural countryside where things are bound to be that bit safer.
Yeah. So one of the articles that I was working on while I was in Japan was looking at the border closures and the impact it's had on a lot of the smaller businesses that depend heavily on tourism. So I was speaking with a lot of people, getting their conception on, what do you think of the border closure, this and that. And this was something I had been watching even before the pandemic, but there's sort of this tension still where you have local concerns about over-tourism in places like Kyoto, areas of Tokyo, but there had been a lot of, grumbling from locals that, we've got so many tourists, we can't live in our own communities. And the sense that I got, like, on my last visit there was, it's almost a sense of relief. Like, yeah, it's bad that all these little mom and pop shops are going out of business, but it's also nice that we can go to temples and not have them jam-packed with people, or, we're not having these sort of culture clashes. Like, one of the things that more than one person told me this was, like, they were annoyed that foreign tourists would take pictures of school kids walking to and from school, because, they got the cute uniforms and all that, and, like, that's something that people have complained about in Japan for years. And so you have this sort of tension between, okay, it's a 2% of their GDP used to depend on tourism, so there's the economic aspect, but at the same time, there's the political pressure that's like, maybe we don't need to go back to trying to hit our 40 million foreign tourist target each year. So, and I think that's probably the big reason why it's been so slow to reopen, is that I don't know if we'll ever go back to, the full unfettered tourism in Japan, but yeah, I'm sure that eventually tourism will reopen, but I don't think it will go back to the way it used to be, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I guess it really just depends. Like you said, I've heard similar things where people are hesitant, because it's been a lifestyle change. I don't say for the better, because obviously you're still dealing with the pandemic, but you're not dealing with as many crowds. You're not dealing with as much daily annoyances of living in, like, one of the cities like Kyoto or Osaka or Tokyo, where it was inundated with tourists, right?
Exactly.
So I think that is one part of the thing that Rob mentioned, though, is that they're starting to push traveling outside of those areas to attract, and maybe, I don't know if I want to say if it's going to because everyone's going to want to go to Tokyo or want to go to Kyoto because they haven't been able to be. And I think part of the one thing the ban has going for it is that it's creating this, I can't get over there. So it makes people want to go even more, right? You can't have it, so you want it more. So I think that there is a subset of travelers that are like, oh, well, Japan's treating people like this. We don't want to deal with them anymore. I absolutely believe there are people out there where they've been put off by how the country is treated, foreign tourists and foreign residents, and maybe is turned off by that and won't want to travel to Japan anymore. But I also think there's a larger subset of people that are like, I've been waiting for 5 years to go over there and I cannot wait. I'm there as soon as they open it, So I think that's going to be like that. But to Allan's point, to what extent are they going to open those borders? Is it going to be a continued slow and gradual? Are there going to be caps that stay in place for a long time? Are they going to try to limit how many people come into the country daily like they are now? Not to the same 20,000 extent, but are there going to be caps? Like, how are they going to try to control it? And that's what I'm curious to see in the future, because I do think that there is going to be some pressure on politicians to bring back tourism, but to an extent, not the full extent.
Yeah, I don't anticipate that there will. I mean, there'll be caps for a while. Yeah, I expect on the daily numbers. But there's got to be a win-win here, isn't there? Somewhere in the middle ground. All the things that we've just been chatting on. If they can focus on the money sort of going forward, and although, as you say, Alan, it's only about sort of 2% of the GDP from tourism, but the revenue generating potential for the government is good, and in particular, like all these things, politics gets involved, but this is a great chance to help smaller rural or coastal towns recover, and many of those obviously are struggling. And if we can spend our money locally with small independent businesses, that's going to directly help them. And and anything that helps them directly like that isn't coming from the government coffers, the government will always welcome. So maybe there's a bit of middle ground where we can all meet, and it'll work.
I think that's like the hopeful part, right? That's where I hope they land, somewhere in the middle, where they get back to the point where tourism it's a big part. And I think the last decade really has kind of pushed it, that's been like the emphasis, like leading up to the Olympics and everything. That was a big push. And I remember when I first went to Japan back in 2005 as a student, and then going back in 2019, I mean, you could see like the gradual influx, how it increased. And I remember seeing articles where they said, like, just the numbers, if you look back historically, it was a substantial growth in terms of tourism over the last decade because they've been pushing it so much. So I think that promotion, to what extent are they going to promote it? Are they going to try to promote other areas and maybe try to diffuse and decentralize the tourism clusters to different areas? I don't know. But I'm interested to see, and I'm hoping. I think a lot of people are saying 2023, early spring, is probably what the goal is marked at, right? That's probably what's realistic. I don't foresee 2022 reopening normal tourism borders. That's just me personally. But who knows? Maybe they feel better after this COVID wave comes down a little bit, and I think it's already kind of seen a little bit of a downturn in terms of cases and whatnot that they're tracking. So let's see, everyone's monitoring on the edge of their seat, right?
Absolutely. Whenever it happens to be, there'll be a lot of people keen to go, and we'll all be out there as soon as we can get out there.
And the one thing I would add is with over the last decade, the big tourism push, that was largely former Prime Minister Abe's pet project. That was him pushing that through. He wanted those 40 million tourists each year. And I think now that he's passed away, I think that loses some of its its political power behind it, to really whip up tourism numbers. So maybe now that's what helps it get to sort of the middle ground, like you guys were talking about. Maybe 40 million's too ambitious. It's not what people want. So maybe we try to cap it, or try to get it to around 20 or 25 million each year. Sustainable numbers, or acceptable numbers anyway. Yeah.
Well, let's see, guys. I think there's a good chance by next year we'll be back to at least not having to apply for these visas, right? But yeah, so first of all, I want to say thanks again for joining today. This was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun talking with you guys about your experiences and just traveling over to Japan this year. Because I think there's a lot of people that are interested and curious, like, what is it like to get over there? Like, what do you have to do? How can you get over there? What are the options? And I mean, if you can create a business venture, then, getting over there on a business visa might be something you could look into. Or if you're interested in small guided tours, go for it, man. Not many people are. But I think that a lot of people will appreciate the input that you guys shared today and the insight into these processes and what things have been like over the last year. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you both an opportunity to just kind of drop where people can find you on social media, where they can find your content, whether it's a YouTube channel or a website or, podcast. So, Rob, go ahead first real quick and let people know where they can find you.
Sure. Yeah, the best thing to do is just go to my website, which is therealjapan.com, and have a look around there. There's plenty of content and loads of free stuff to make your trip planning for whenever you are able to travel that bit more pleasurable. And and I'm across all the social as The Real Japan, so they'll be able to find me.
Awesome. Allan, your turn. Go.
So I need to up my social media game, but I've got the Tokyo Confidential podcast. It's available on iTunes, most podcast hosts, I think. And I do have some articles coming out soon in City Lab, New York Times, a few of the big newspapers. So all to do with Japan and a lot of the border closure stuff and other Japan-related topics.
Awesome. Well, whenever those do drop, let me know and we'll be more than happy to share them.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And Rob, you too. If you have any upcoming articles or any big things you're coming out with, let us know.
Will do. And likewise, Allan, send them over to me as well. Happy to share.
Sure thing.
All right. Well, again, thank you both. This was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to get back over to Japan. I don't know about you guys, but
see you there,
soon
Doug.
enough.
Yeah, see you there.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into the Krewe of Japan podcast. A special thank you to Rob Dyer of The Real Japan and Allan Richarz of Tokyo Confidential Podcast for joining us and sharing their stories and insight. We hope you enjoyed hearing some real-world experiences from a few folks who traveled to Japan over the last few months. Hopefully, with the updates I briefly mentioned at the beginning of the podcast regarding the latest revisions to travel policy, things will start to pick up for traditional pre-pandemic-esque independent travel without the hassle of applying for visas. Until then, at least after hearing this podcast, you know you have a few other options available to you to get you in the door if you really want to go. While you're still here and listening, check out some of our guest links in the show notes. Both Rob and Allan have some superb insight on a variety of topics relating to Japan. And they're both on Twitter. Rob is at TheRealJapan1, TheRealJapan1, the number, and his website is therealjapan.com. Allan, you can find on Twitter as well, with his personal handle being at Allan Richarz, ALLANRICHARZ, and his podcast handle, TokyoConf, at TOKYOCONF. Check out their stuff, you're not going to be disappointed. Have you recently traveled to Japan and want to share your story? Share with us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok at Krewe of Japan Podcast. That's Instagram at Krewe of Japan Podcast, KREWEOFJAPAN PODCAST. Facebook, search Krewe of Japan Podcast. Twitter at Krewe of Japan, KREWEOFJAPAN. And then TikTok also at Krewe of Japan Podcast. I'm tired of spelling, so I'm not going to spell that one. While you're there, give us a follow, like, reshare, retweet, share, whatever else they're calling it on social media nowadays. Anything you do, we'll greatly appreciate it. Let us know how you're enjoying the podcast. Or perhaps you want to share some feedback in a more private setting. Send us an email at kreweofjapanpodcast@gmail.com. KREWOFJAPANPODCAST@gmail.com. Speaking of feedback, if you're enjoying what you're listening to, please feel free to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast streaming app. Trying to level up that rating game, y'all. But again, as always, any and all support is greatly appreciated. And lastly, just to help support our local Japanese community and Japan Society in New Orleans, come out to Japan Fest at New Orleans Museum of Art on October 8th from 10 to 4. See and check out all the fun events and activities that they have available. We'd love to see you there. I'll definitely be there. So until next time, see ya.